thought you had some questions, but here we go. Okay, for both of you. Please tell us how you are working to include diverse communities in the political process, particularly low-income communities and communities of color. Why don't you start, Tom?
So I think this has been the best development of our entire campaign. I've been at this now, actually I left my job a year ago today. We've been at this campaign for a full year. And I realized early on, I talked to one of my good friends, he's the Borough Council President in Steelton, his name is Brier. Really, really great guy. And what he told me was that you should spend the first 8 or 9 months of your campaign going to Harrisburg, going to Steelton, going to York, and not telling anybody you're running, but just get to know people. So we were going to trash cleanups in York in the middle of July. We were going to barbecues and community events, getting to know people. And eventually they were like, wait, who's this guy? And why is he here? And that established a much more real sense of trust. And so we've earned the endorsement of Reverend Franklin Allen, the president of the NAACP. We've earned the endorsement of Joe Robinson and Reggie Guy, who are the co-founders of the Martin Luther King Institute in Harrisburg. We've earned the endorsement of Brian Proctor, who's the Borough Council President in Steelton. We have a diverse team that reflects our district, where we can go door to door, not with folks who are from outside the area, but who live in the communities. Because I realized early on that to make a difference, you have to go where people feel voiceless. And so we've had town halls in Steelton. We've had town halls at Camp Curtin YMCA in Harrisburg. We've had town halls at the Central Market in York City to go and understand what it is we can do to give back to the people who really need help. And I think that's been the most positive development of our entire campaign.
Thank you. Eugene.
The first thing you have to do is show up. And I show up everywhere, whether it be in urban, suburban, and rural parts. We door knock in Carlisle, we door knock in York, we door knock in Harrisburg. We door knock in rural parts of the district, and the urban parts and suburban parts. So number one is you show up. Number two is, I think people have to get to know who we are as people. Most people are surprised when they, with 7 years you see me on television as your auditor general, but you don't always get to know the person behind the television. When I talk about losing a brother to muscular dystrophy, there are a lot of families in South Central Pennsylvania that are one health disaster away from being in poverty. Most people are not aware that my father was incarcerated. And there are way too many families in South Central Pennsylvania that are dealing with that very issue, whether it be a parent or a child or some other loved one. Another thing I think the best predictor of future behavior is to look at past behavior. In my district office when I was a state rep, we had a diverse staff. We had bilingual staff, and I've had only female chiefs of staff. In my district office in York, we had 3 women, 1 African-American woman, who I'm now proud to say is on the York City Council. And we've also had diverse endorsements, including Wanda Williams, the president of the Harrisburg City Council, and many other people across the district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now here's one that asks, I haven't heard either of you disagree on any significant issue. So, other than accepting the corporate contributions, please choose one issue that you feel you are different from your opponent and discuss why he is wrong on that issue. So, who wants to start? You want to start, Tom?
Sure.
All right.
So I did mention this a little bit earlier, but fracking, and this is the reason we've endorsed the Green New Deal. The extension of fracking through the development of petrochemical plants compounds the climate change crisis that we're facing in this country. It makes air pollution worse, it makes water quality worse, it harms low-income communities even worse than others, and we saw this happen in Louisiana. They called them cancer alleys for the people who are living next to these petrochemical plants. And as I mentioned, if we want to solve the climate crisis, if we want to stick our flag in the ground and say that this is the issue that our generation could stand on and actually bring our country forward, then we can't continue to make our climate worse. And I think that's a major difference between Eugene and me, is that I would never support something that would make the climate change problem worse. And the petrochemical perpetuation does just that.
Eugene?
The biggest difference is despite what are mostly agreements on many of these issues, I've actually done something about this. That's why the League of Conservation Voters has endorsed me. That's why Clean Water Action has endorsed me, because I took on the frackers. The first ever audit of the fracking industry, not just in Pennsylvania, but across the United States. Voted against Tom Corbett's giveaway to the fracking industry, and the first ever audit across the United States of the actual financial cost of what climate change is doing in Pennsylvania. Many of our issues and our positions are the exact same, or pretty close. But I've actually gotten something done. I've taken on powerful people. I've taken on a Democratic and Republican governor's auditor general. I've taken on Big Pharma to lower prescription drug prices. I've taken on the fracking industry to make sure that we have cleaner air and cleaner water. And that's why so many of these groups, both in Pennsylvania and across the United States, are endorsing me. The biggest difference is not where we stand, but on what we've actually done. I have taken on the tough fights. I've taken on bullies all over Pennsylvania, and I've won. And this coming November, if I'm your nominee, I will take on Scott Perry, and I will beat him. And how do I know? In 2016, even though Donald Trump won this district by 9 points, one other Democrat carried it that exact same day, and that was me. And I did it without running a single television commercial. Whether you like it or not, we're going to run commercials this campaign.
Okay, all right, here's a quick one. Do you support legalizing marijuana, recreational marijuana? Yes, no.
I was the actual first statewide elected official in 2017 to endorse regulating and taxing it, whatever phrase you want to use it, that is legalization. I believe Pennsylvania, under the model we've done as Auditor General, would actually bring in $581 million a year in tax revenue if we regulated and taxed it. It also would lead to a host of criminal justice reform. Tom talked about some of those statistics earlier that are absolutely correct about the disparate treatment of minorities when it comes to marijuana prosecutions. We need to regulate and tax it. One other point that's critical is that Pennsylvania has medicinal marijuana that's legal. However, our military cannot use it because it's still illegal at the federal level. We need to reform that as well, so our vets are able to get access to medicinal marijuana for some of the critical treatment they need.
Okay, I'm gonna combine these two because they're almost the same.
He gets the
Oh, I'm
answer.
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Don't be long, don't worry. I support the legalization of marijuana too, and for me, it's as much a criminal justice issue as anything. I mentioned earlier the fact that black youth are 60 times more likely to be arrested for a drug crime than white youth. And one of the ideas that Kamala Harris proposed, which I think is a great one, is that once we take marijuana off being a Schedule I drug and allow for this to happen at the state level, it should be low-income communities who are suffering the most from these drug assaults that benefit from the legalization of the drug. And so we should be allowing entrepreneurial opportunities to the low-income communities who are harmed the most, and then providing a path for record expungement to make sure that it's not just going forward, but it's everybody who has been harmed in the past who benefits from that law as well.
Okay, we have to have a change in the rules a little bit. We have to restrict it down to 1 minute answers, so we can get, so there's a bunch of these questions here, so I'm gonna combine two. One is, what is your plan to win over Republican voters? What is your message? And how will you overcome this gridlock in Washington and the hyper-partisanship? It's almost the same thing. So why don't you start, Eugene?
As Auditor General, I've been taking on tough fights that appeal to anyone, regardless of ideology. Finding over $1 billion wasted by Harrisburg, uncovering 3,200 untested rape kits, finding 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the Child Abuse Hotline, and holding both Governor Wolf and Governor Corbett accountable. That's why I was able to carry the district in 2016. I won over nearly 30% of Trump voters in 2016. And that's the type of message that I can take to battle against Scott Perry. Something that cuts across ideology, something that will appeal to voters regardless of background, and make sure that we defeat Scott Perry and send him packing. So that's how I'll do it. I'll talk about what I've done and the fights I'll take on in Washington, D.C. I've won this district before, and I'll do it again this year.
Go ahead.
So the one thing I think that President Trump identified with Republicans is they are as adamant about special interest and money politics as Democrats are. And what I've seen in saying to Republicans is that I'm running against two politicians who, for their entire careers, have taken corporate money. And that's a unifying message to say that we have a chance in this district to clean government, to restart what democracy looks like. And as someone coming in and saying, I'm not indicting anybody for being a Republican, I'm not coming in simply to fight, I'm trying to understand what the Democratic Party can do better. Why have we let you down? Why can't we be the ones to provide you with health care and retirement and a fair wage? And what can the Democrats do to make your lives better? Because I think the Democrats have failed in many ways in that regard. And we don't need somebody who's going in to make that problem worse and to fight more, but to actually create a sense of unity with both parties.
Okay. The issue of college education, I think both of you have said something about wanting to make it free in some form or fashion. Clarify that. And do you mean just tuition, or do you mean room, board, travel abroad, all of that stuff? What do you mean?
Eugene was the one who said free state tuition, free state college, which I'd be interested to hear how we would pay for that. But what I would like to see us do is not just simply provide, say, free state universities, but specify free associate programs for low-income communities who are struggling to get access to education, lowering the cost of trade programs and apprenticeship programs, and allowing for a much more diverse set of options when somebody graduates from high school. And so I think just providing free college really doesn't provide any additional opportunities to people, but what we can do is actually provide them with more options, and in doing so, lower the cost and lower the debt in the process.
Our public universities in Pennsylvania and across the country are way too expensive. Way too expensive. Pitt and Penn State, I've audited them both, are first and third in the nation in the cost of tuition for in-state students. That's wrong, and that's here in Pennsylvania. Our state system of higher education costs too much. And the reason why there is a divide on this issue among different age groups is because many people remember, they think, oh, why are their loans so high? Because the subsidies to our public universities have gone down so much over time that some people aren't aware of just how bad the debt is. Pennsylvania leads the nation in undergraduate debt in the United States. We need to reform the student loan industry to make sure that people are getting better rates. We need to have our public universities, at minimum, have the tuition lower, if not free, for our public universities. And when we say there's no money to pay for it, let me tell you something. I found $1 billion wasted by Harrisburg. There's money to pay for that if there's the will.
Okay, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, you can hold it. What policy and values do you agree with the senator, and which do you disagree with? You can start, Eugene.
Number one, I agree with him, is on marijuana legalization. I think he is spot on that, and he has been, I don't know if the other candidates that are still in the race have taken the same position, and I tell you that is one that I absolutely agree with. I also think we need massive reform of the student loan industry. I think that's another fight he's taken on, and also prescription drugs when it comes to allowing Medicare for negotiating better prescription drug prices. So those are three. I asked for one, I give you three. The biggest disagreement is I think Medicare should be there for people that want to buy in, but I don't think we should have a one-size-fits-all insurance system in the United States. We may be able to get there someday, but I don't think we'd be ready for it by the next congressional term.
Tom.
I agree with Bernie on the Green New Deal. Bernie recognizes that is the ultimate question of our time, and that any issue going forward has to begin with how do we save our planet from catastrophe. And so Bernie was one of the first to be endorsed by the Sunrise Movement, which we've also been endorsed by, and I think that's why young people are flocking to Bernie Sanders, is because he's speaking their language. He's showing them that this system is not working for young people, that it's not working for 99% of Americans, that billionaires are better off in society today than anybody else and pay less money in taxes than the middle class. Bernie has put a laser on the economic problems that we have. I disagree with him on deviating away from capitalism. I think we can find a really proper balance between socialist programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, while also fixing the malignant form of capitalism that we have today. But Bernie has identified precisely the issues that everyday Americans are facing today.
Okay, I think we have time for a few more questions. How's the time going? Pretty good? Okay. Last year, over 1,000 people a day were crossing our border illegally. I haven't checked that fact, that's what they said. Do you support open borders? And if not, how do you discontinue catch and release? How about you start, Tom?
I don't support open borders. And the fact of the matter is that 98% of crime comes through legal ports of entry. And as I mentioned earlier, in many ways, this is a self-inflicted wound because we've taken away the humanitarian aid that we're providing to other countries, and that's caused an increase in immigration on the back end. And so we're doing this to ourselves. And so to fix the immigration process, we have to look at the countries that are struggling the most and provide foreign humanitarian aid to those countries to prevent the massive influx in immigrants.
Eugene?
The idea that we cannot be strong and smart at the exact same time befuddles me. We do need to have borders, and they do need to be enforced. But we need to be smart at how we enforce them. And the idea of just building a wall as a way to enforce it makes no sense. So that's one item. We need to make sure that we do have borders and they are enforced. But we also need to have a compassionate and just immigration system that allows people that are following the rules to come into the United States. We also need to make sure that the people that are already here, the dreamers and the nearly 11 million that are undocumented, have a path to citizenship. Those are items that I believe there is broad bipartisan agreement on. It's something that can absolutely get done in the next congressional term. It will not happen with Scott Perry, but it will happen with me.
Here's a kind of different question. Let's see if you've thought about this. Regarding security issues, this person is wondering about data privacy. Have you given any thought, can you speak to these unregulated tech companies, specifically how they collect, study, sell, and profit off of individual data, and how algorithms have been shown to systematically exhibit bias against marginalized communities? There's a lot there, but have you given any thought of the privacy issue online?
The short answer is yes. I think any of us that have ever said something out loud, for me, it's when is the Pirates opener or the Orioles opener. And then later on, you'll look at your phone and go, buy your Orioles season tickets here. You're like, how did that happen? I do these nonsense obstacle course races. I'll say it, and 2 minutes later, there's an ad. Sign up for the next Spartan race. And we've all had these, whether it's baseball or something else. The impact on our privacy by what is happening with the tech companies is clearly inexcusable. We need to have a comprehensive privacy bill of rights built across the United States. Many of these companies exist because of investments the United States taxpayers have made, and then they profiteer off of the own information that we have on these phones. That needs to be reformed. We need to have a privacy bill of rights, and the federal government needs to enforce it.
Tom?
So this was my area of expertise as a lawyer. We live in a surveillance economy. Our data is being taken and then weaponized against us to make us make decisions that corporations want us to make. And so the idea that we're speaking into our phones and then they're giving us, based on what we say, the information that we want, is a misnomer, because it's actually the algorithm that knows us that well. This isn't voice recognition. This is the algorithm that has so acutely identified each individual person's likes, desires, and wants that they can show everybody a tailor-made blueprint of exactly what they want next. We need a right to be forgotten in this country, just like they have in Europe. We need to have citizens exert control over their data privacy. Because in society today, there's nothing we can do anymore that isn't free from surveillance. Even the black boxes in our cars sell our geolocation data to private companies so we can be hit with an ad as soon as we drive by a Nike or a Bob Evans because they know that our geolocation history. everything we do is based on tracking, and we need people in government to recognize how to fix it.
Okay, this one was actually directed toward you, Tom, but I'm going to open it to both of you because it does get to this question of if you don't take corporate donations. This person has heard people say that before, but then how do you get the money to be able to get your message out? How do you get name recognition if you don't appear on TV? So where is your money coming from? And how can you fund the campaign if you don't take corporate donations? So both of you can address it.
So our money has come from values, because when people see that you're not running on corporate interests, they're willing to contribute and invest in the campaign because it means that much more. And so we've raised $420,000 to date so far. George Scott, who ran a phenomenal campaign in 2018 and showed us all that this race is winnable, raised 90 in the whole primary. And we raised 420,000 because we've shown people that we're running a campaign that is at its core grassroots. And so we've gone to every pocket of the district. We've done events in Halifax and Millersburg and York and Hershey and Hummelstown and Carlisle, everywhere. And we've gone to folks and said that your investment means more for our campaign because we're not relying on special interests to get our message across. And I think that message is much more powerful when we have the track records that back it up.
Eugene?
As your Auditor General, you've seen the fights I've taken on, regardless of who they are, taking on the powerful. And that's one of the reasons why we've raised over $850,000 so far in this campaign. And people can go on the website, it's the FEC, and see half of my donations have come from the district, from individuals, and 95% of my donations have come from inside Pennsylvania. But let me also be very clear, I think this goes to the core of the question. You only get to govern if you win. The Coke Action Network has endorsed 4 candidates in the United States. One of them is Scott Perry. What they are going to come at this summer and beyond is going to be the most vicious campaign the people of central Pennsylvania have ever seen. I'm a 2-sport athlete. My size, I played college football. I relish contact. I got into this to fight and win on behalf of the people of this district, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Okay, I think that was our last question. Now we will move to our closing statements. Are you ready? All right. So Eugene, I think you start, and Mr. Brier, you end.
I just want, how long do we?
It's 2 minutes.
Great,
2 minutes.
Thank you very much, everyone. Certainly thank you to Tom, Joyce for moderating the Capital Region stand-up, and for everyone to giving up a beautiful Sunday afternoon here in central Pennsylvania. For the last 7 years, I've been honored to be your Auditor General, for taking on the tough fights for taxpayers, for women, our cities, our boroughs and towns, finding 3,200 untested rape kits, bringing those creeps to justice, 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the Child Abuse Hotline, and over $1 billion wasted by Harrisburg. That is a message that can win in November and help me govern beyond that. I also know what it's like to suffer loss, losing a brother to muscular dystrophy, having him not be able to have health insurance. I know what it's like to overcome challenges, having a father that was incarcerated, but also seeing what happens when the VA doesn't stand up for vets. And also a life experience that prepares me for what may be the most challenging next 2 years since at least the Great Depression in the United States. I'm running for Congress because we need to send Scott Perry packing. This is going to be a tough fight, not just to fight for our district, but to try to repair the wounds in our country, to try to bring more civility, more decency, and to try to bring more unity. My track record is doing that. I'm running for Congress because the times have chosen us, and the time is now to send Scott Perry packing and to bring our country together.
Thank you. Tom.
For those of you who know me, and know that I'm a big history buff, and in 1860, Abraham Lincoln said that the question of that election was whether the United States would exist half slave or half free. The question in 2020, not just for our district, but for our country, is whether the United States will exist at all. Climate change threatens our planet. Authoritarianism and nuclear proliferation threatens our civilization. Fear threatens our democracy. The beauty of it is that we can play a real role in this district in changing that future. Because for the past several years, we've really suffered from a tragic lack of leadership. And Eugene said earlier, the best predictor of future behavior is to look at past behavior. His past behavior shows that at the very moment where we really needed him to stand on principle, he voted for an unconstitutional gerrymandering bill. I promise you, I would never do that. I promise I would never vote on something like that that will define my political career. I promise that I will never support the expansion of fracking. I promise you that I won't take corporate money. And unlike Scott Perry, I recognize that people are better off with health care, not without health care. I recognize that the middle class should be the focus of our economic system. I recognize that the problems of our time aren't on the minorities or on immigrants or on the poor, but are on the wealthy and the elites who have taken over our society. And so in this critical election year, we have to vote our values. That's the only thing that has been proven to work in history. And I would ask you to look at my values, to look at the values that we stand on, and if they align with yours, to support us not only in this election year, but for the next several decades in central Pennsylvania, so we can make this the epicenter of Democratic politics for years to come. Thank you.
I get to respond.
Yes,
What's
It
the
is a-
closing, isn't it?
it
Right.
was, but
It is amazing when we are trying to bring unity, and my closing was about trying to bring unity, that there would be a cheap shot thrown to try to divide us.
Hold on, okay?
Yes,
My turn
no.
now?
I think let's let him finish. And
Okay.
then
The rule is if your name is mentioned,
Or he.
I didn't mention
But
your
it was
name.
explicitly referring to his record.
that, when you look at my record as Auditor General and State Legislator, fighting to reform government, fighting Big Pharma to lower the cost of prescription drugs, taking on the fights of the police departments for 3,200 untested rape kits, 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. That's my record. And also my record is fighting for independent redistricting reform. That's my record. And taking on the frackers. That's my record, and that's the record I'm going to take to the voters.
okay, Mr. Brier, you have 30 seconds.
John Adams said that facts are stubborn things. The facts don't lie. If you want politicians who don't take corporate money, if you want politicians who recognize what fracking does for our planet, if you want politicians who recognize gerrymandering for what it is, you have one choice, and I would welcome the opportunity to earn your vote. So thank you.
I'm gonna have to borrow this.
Thank you, both of you. Representative DePasquale and Paul Brier, thank you both. Thank you. And accolades the Capitol Region stands up for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to really explore the issues here. And thanks to all of you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.